I want to welcome everybody. This is a special Common Sense podcast. My name's Paul Jacob. Here with me today is my co-host, Tim Verkala, but also we have a special guest that we're going to be talking to and about some of his activities. Our special guest is Joseph. He is a Taiwanese attorney who is living in Norway and has been going to school and working there, and has run into some problems we're going to talk about at length. And to get us started, and also just because since both Joseph and Tim are captive audience, I'm going to force them to hear my commentary. It's only a couple minutes, but regular readers of Common Sense saw this several weeks ago, but it's a short way to give people a sense of what we're talking about, and then we're going to go into a lot more depth on it. This short commentary was entitled, Not Being Norway. Aren't Norwegians the good guys? Yet somehow this bastion of human rights and best democracy in the world has, since 2010, forcibly registered the nationality of Taiwanese residing in Norway as Chinese. The action is considered an act of appeasement. The News Lens paraphrases Joseph, a Taiwanese lawyer based in Norway, after the Norwegian Nobel Committee angered Beijing by awarding the Peace Prize to the late human rights activist Liu Xiaobo the same year. Norway's promotion of human rights upset the genocidal Chinese government, which had imprisoned Liu Xiaobo, and which then moved to suspend trade talks with Norway and restrict exports of important commodities. It took 6 years of placating the Chinazis before normal diplomatic and economic relations were restored. Meanwhile, Taiwanese students living in the land of the midnight sun are demanding their right simply to be Taiwanese. Joseph formed a group, Taiwan, My Name, My Right, to lobby Norway's government and is now legally challenging the policy. After Norway's Supreme Court rejected their lawsuit last year, they have appealed to the European Court of Human Rights. The applicants are Taiwanese, argues Professor Jill Marshall of the University of London. Failing to state this on their official documentation and instead ascribing them with an incorrect nationality misidentifies them and violates their right to personal identity. Even as Norway denies Taiwanese identity, its own identity takes the biggest hit. Prime Minister Erna Solberg explained her 2014 snubbing of the Dalai Lama as, quote, a necessary sacrifice in order to show China that it's important for us to have a dialogue with them, end quote. Sacrificing what's right and just for trade deals with totalitarians is no way to be Norway. This is Common Sense. I'm Paul Jacob. Joseph, I wrote about 250, 300 words about what happened, but you've been living and breathing it. What do you think of that? And how does this, how does this sit with you in terms of a kind of a quick update on what the case is?
So the cause of this case, obviously from the commentary you have told to your audience, is that we Taiwanese residents here in Norway are forcibly being registered. That means we must identify ourselves when we verify the residence permit to the authority. We are forced to be registered or identify ourselves as Chinese because all the alternatives during our application to the immigration authorities here, we are asked that we can only pick or take up our nationality as Kina, that means China in Norwegian. So basically our national identity was cancelled by the Norwegian authority, because we fully identify ourselves as Taiwanese, and Taiwan is the only country that we want the citizenship of. So basically, this is a big humiliation against all Taiwanese people here. So generally, the Taiwanese residents here are very unsatisfied with this situation. So that's why we have tried to try every means we could to strive for our right to this personal identity, to be a Taiwanese in Norway.
And we will get into kind of the step-by-step of the case here in just a little bit. But probably right off the bat, let us explain to our listeners who won't see that your face is being covered up, but obviously the folks looking at the video notice that. Can you talk a little bit about why you have concerns, which I certainly share, about your own personal safety and why you're looking to? I mean, you've made a very brave move by filing this lawsuit, but are trying to protect your identity in some way by having your face not shown.
I think the obvious reason is that I'm afraid of being targeted by the CCP. And as I currently live in Oslo, which the rights of Taiwanese are not so well protected, as you can see in this case. And also because I am registered as a Chinese citizen here in Norway. So me and my family really afraid that something might happen, because we initiated this case to fight, although it's legally fighting our rights, but I think the PRC authority might deem us as an enemy against the state, because we are claiming that we are not Taiwanese, which is basically against their anti-succession law, that Taiwan is a part of China. So if I was repatriated back to China by Norway, I might face prosecution because of violating the Chinese law, which to me is unjustified, of course. But there is such a possibility. And also, I don't want my families to get involved because of this. This is a move that I want to do it myself, and I don't want my family's member to get, because of this movement I initiated, and get some trouble, of course.
To anyone who will use the term CCP, and I think most people who are regular readers of Common Sense will know that that's the Chinese Communist Party, but just in case anybody doesn't know, there you have it. One of the interesting things here that people may not appreciate is that there have been other people who have been repatriated, who they're from Taiwan and they're sent to China. And that's, that is a pretty serious problem. Kind of like if you're an American and instead of them sending you to, someplace in America, they sent you to China. It would not be a good thing. And so I think that's really important. The other thing that people may not be aware of is that there are numerous cases of people who leave China, are in the United States, are a U.S. citizen, or in any other country in the world, and have, are a citizen of that country. And if they speak out against China, their family members still in China are subject to all kinds of harassment and worse. So it's a pretty serious thing. And I just, hats off to you, Joseph, in terms of your bravery and also your good sense and compassion for your family and others, that, to try to protect them as much as possible.
Thank you, Paul. But speaking of this, I also want to raise awareness that one Taiwanese human rights activist is now detained in China simply because he tried to spread some democratic educational material to his Chinese friends, and actually the spreading was on the social media in Taiwan. So the action did not even happen in mainland China. But still, when he traveled from Hong Kong to Shenzhen in China, he was arrested and then suddenly vanished for a couple months. And then later, he was forced to televise confessed his crime against the PRC on the television. So that's very scary.
Yes.
For us Taiwanese people. Yeah.
You know, I've written some about what's happened in Hong Kong, the protest, and then, of course, the national security law now. And one of the things that is true is that national security law criminalizes statements against China, even if you're not in Hong Kong. In other words, if and it's arguable that even if you're not Chinese but said something, they could, if they ever caught you, they could, bring that against you. But it's obvious that if you're a Hong Konger and you leave Hong Kong and say something against the CCP, that it could be 10 years later and you're in a different country, and if they somehow get you, they will take advantage of that. And so it's a scary regime. Kind of puts the total in totalitarian. But
there were history that they actually arrested people outside of China. Some cases even happened like in Thailand and other Southeast Asian country. So you can be arrested not only within the territory of China, but even outside the border of China.
Yes. We talk about some of the different threats and so on. It's since I've been following what's been happening in Taiwan and China and so on, and know some people in Taiwan and communicate with them, especially in the last year or so, right before the pandemic hit. You had Chai Ing-wen win the Democratic Progressive Party candidate, won a second term and won it big. And the DPP is very pro-democracy, sees Taiwan as a separate independent country. And she's always saying, well, I mean, we just are. It's pretty obvious. And I think is so good at that, but it has really led to a lot of attacks in the sense of flying 28 planes a week or so ago into Taiwanese airspace, constant threats. And, the Taiwanese are smart people. They're tough. They've lived through this for years. So they're not shaking in their boots, but at the same time, it just for an outsider to have a sense that you and other people in Taiwan are having to live with these constant threats. I just find it very upsetting. And of course, it's not happening to me. I'm seeing it happen to somebody else. I just wonder, what you might say about that. What is it like for Taiwanese to be living with this constant threat?
Yeah, I think you might know that in 1996, that when we first got the opportunity to elect our president, because we were just democratized at that time, actually the PRC sent missiles to the Taiwan Strait to intimidate us to directly elect our first president. So basically, what we are doing to sustain our independence or democracy are a constant threat against the PRC or the one-party CCP in China, as you can say. So I believe what is happening recently actually has raised the awareness of Taiwanese people that the threat from China could only be more and more imminent as long as we keep our own independence and democracy. So I'm thinking that considering more and more those bombers and jet planes of the army of the PRC,
People's Liberation.
The PLA. So they're constantly flying around the islands of Taiwan, and our pilots also have to fly to accompany them in case that they will suddenly attack our country. So you can see that there are actually chances that there become some accidents in the air if the planes fly too close to each other. So if there was an accident in the air, I'm really afraid that it would escalate to something bigger or even incur a war, so that China could have some excuse to invade Taiwan because of that. So this is something I'm really worried about recently because of these movements. And what I want to inform your audience is that actually we are already under attack, but it is not a very traditional military attack from China. It is the new modern way of attack. It is a cyber attack. Like maybe you already know that how Russian attack the US by sending disinformation to your society, and now China is doing the same thing against the Taiwanese society. So many friends of my parents, constantly receiving false information and from some farm content websites that spread false information about the pandemic, so that make them worried or untrust our own government. So it kind of split our society and deepen the generation gap of our society. So that's also scary of how they kind of make use of our freedom and democracy to attack our country.
Yes, and I wanted to get in and ask you kind of to tell a little bit about yourself, how you grew up, where in Taiwan you're from, that sort of thing. But then let me also ask you, after you tell us just a little bit about that, to give us a little bit of a history lesson in terms of, you mentioned the generational difference, and I'll give folks kind of the headline aspect of it, which is that Taiwan, after the Civil War, and of course, we'll get into a little bit about the fact that Taiwan is a lot more than just the people who came over after the Civil War, who came over from China. I mean, there's already a country there and millions of people. But tell us a little bit about, after you just give me some idea of kind of how you grew up, where you're from, and that sort of thing, about that generational divide, because you had 4 decades after the Chinese Civil War of martial law, a very authoritarian government in Taiwan. And then the people kept pushing and ended up creating a very free and vibrant democratic country, and which I would argue, just for a little insert here, is, I think, the most inspiring story of going from really serious authoritarian government to a free society in modern times. And I think, I just think it's so important that people realize what the people of Taiwan have done, and and so it's night and day. It's arguably the most free democratic country in Asia, and literally, 3 or 4 decades ago, it was a completely authoritarian, if not totalitarian type government. So with all that set up, now I'm going to let you talk, Joseph.
Yes, thank you, Paul. I can briefly introduce myself. I was born in Taipei, the capital of our country, but later my family moved to Taichung, which is in the middle of the island, but the second largest city in population currently. So I basically grew up there in this middle city of Taiwan. And I later went to Taipei to study laws at the National Taiwan University, and then got my bachelor degree there. And I also passed the bar exam in the same year of my graduation, and then I served in the military for 1 year. So after I finished my obligation in the military, I worked in a business law firm, actually, one of the biggest business law firm in Taiwan for 2.5 years as an associate lawyer. So basically, my previous experience has nothing to do of my current movement here. So talking back to the modern history of Taiwan, I think the experience of my generation is definitely very different from the experience of my parents' generation, because we are basically born in a free and democratic country during our childhood and also the whole growing experience of our lives. But when we learn about the history of Taiwan, of course, what we learn were also very different from what we parents learned, because what they learn are basically all about mainland China. In their time, they have to memorize all the provinces in China, even though they don't exist anymore, because after the PRC took over China, the provinces was totally reformed. So basically, they have to read those details by heart. So it's very unuseful in my point of view. But in our generation, we have to learn. What we started to pick up is that we started to know about the real history of Taiwan, which can trace back all the way to the Stone Age. And we have Aboriginal people, and then later the Han Chinese immigrants came as early as in the Ming Dynasty. So that started our civilization. And then so basically, from this kind of education, historical education and geographical education, we very identify ourselves as native Taiwanese. And also we learned that the Chinese Civil War happened in 1949, after the Second World War. Actually, it's only part of the Taiwanese history, because after the nationalists or the Kuomintang, the KMT, lost the Civil War, and Chiang Kai-shek and his army and government official and their families moved to Taiwan, that makes the modern China a part of the history of Taiwan. But it's definitely not a whole history about Taiwan. So when I moved to Norway and met many new friends in European country, and when we talk about Taiwan, all their image is only about the civil war between the nationalists and communists and the Communist Party. And that's disappointed me a lot, because actually what I know from my country has a lot more can be shown to the foreigners. It's not only that we are a historical heritage of this civil war. So what I mean is that what we learned in the Taiwanese history is also very different from what my parents learned, because they learned the history in an authoritarian which the educational material was was provided by the authoritarian region, right? So what they learned is very one-sided, and they don't really have very critical thinkings about the history. So at that time, many of them were kind of brainwashed that they were Chinese, because it was a government that taught them that you can only be Chinese and not Taiwanese. In their age, many of them are even forbidden to speak their modern tongue, which is Taiwanese. And so in my generation, I also was affected by this policy, because I am not very fluent Taiwanese speaker, which is basically my mother tongue. That should be my mother tongue. So it is a tragedy. It is a tragedy that somehow we have lost our native culture. But it was after the democratization happening from the 70s to 80s that we Taiwanese started to pick up our own local culture and languages we used to have. And it is because during the martial law time that many of our ancestors who are political elites at that time were persecuted by the dictator and the one-party state, the authoritarian regime at that time. So it was after that our ancestors to strive for our own democracy and freedom through all kinds of social movements that people start to be aware that actually we have our own culture. And so that's why we and our later generations start to know that actually we possess the identity of Taiwanese, which of course the Chinese culture has some influence to this identity, but basically it is just a part of us, we don't identify ourselves as Chinese anymore. So to our generation, these democratic values and liberal values has many connections to this identity. I can say that. Yeah.
It is interesting that for most people who aren't up on the history of Taiwan, and most people aren't, especially outside of Taiwan in the United States, people are all about there was a civil war and part of China is on the mainland and the other part of China is on Taiwan, as if nobody was living there beforehand.
Yeah.
And as I understand it from what I've read, when Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalist forces came on to Taiwan, they represented about 12% of the population. So you can see that, wait a second, there's the bulk of the population was already there. And other people might say, okay, but they were Chinese before that, right? Well, for 50 years before that, they were under Japanese control.
Yeah.
And now for most of Asia, if you think about being under Imperial Japan's control, it isn't a very nice story. And I'm not pretending that the Japanese were always kind to every single person in Taiwan.
Yeah.
But the truth is they saw Taiwan, as I understand it, as in their sphere, because of course it's in that island chain that includes Japan and Taiwan and the Philippines, and so they looked to bring Taiwan into Japan, not as a colony somewhere, but as part of Japan. And what happened is you had 50 years of a lot of building and infrastructure, and it was a fairly a lot of progress was made in Taiwan. And so today there's real friendship between Japan and Taiwan in a way that there's not between Japan and China or Japan and Korea. And so it's not this, okay, there was a civil war and that's what split it up. China historically was never very involved in Taiwan. They claimed it. A lot of Han Chinese people moved there for a new adventure and a new place to live. But anyway, the history of it, because I knew nothing before 2 years ago. I came to an event in Taiwan and decided, oh, I should probably read a history book. And I was fascinated about the history of Taiwan, and it was all stuff I did not know. And it's important because, you know, you've got China saying, hey, this is ours. And, you know, if you don't know anything, you kind of think, well, yeah, there was a civil war, it split off. It's not as simple as that. And of course, the other aspect of that is that there was a column in the U.S. recently that the columnist asked, who does Taiwan belong to? And his argument was kind of one of these big geopolitical things. And I thought, well, my goodness, it belongs to the people of Taiwan. Who else could it belong to? And that's the other part of this story, is that over this period of history, more and more, and friends I have in Taiwan, not only do they feel that identity, but even their parents have really changed in the level of identity, and because it's no longer being suppressed. So it's very interesting, and thanks for that history lesson. The other aspect of that is for people to realize there was a major event in Taiwan called the 228 incident. And it was the nationalists who came in to police Taiwan after World War II. And there was an incident where they beat up a woman. And then I think there was a response that the soldiers were beaten up for beating up the woman. It ended up leaving thousands of people dead. And it was the precursor for the White Terror and decades of martial law and people being disappeared and being held without charge and everything else. But it tends to show that as the nationalists came over, this was not just another part of China that everything was going to be hunky-dory. It was a separate place. So anyway, I think for our listeners, Joseph, that history is really, really important. So what then brought you to Norway?
As I told your audience that I work in a business law firm, but during my experience there, I was not so satisfied by serving the corporations and white collars executives. I felt that that's not what I want for my whole career. So, and I still have a deep interest in criminal policy. Actually, it has lasted since I studied in laws in the university years. So I feel that I want to pursue an academic career in this area. So then I figured out that actually Norway is one of the best countries in this area. As I show you in the video, that how they compare the criminal system, prison system of the U.S. and Norway. Basically, they focus on rehabilitation and restorative justice. That is, at that time, I really want to learn about. So that's basically the main reason why I came to Norway in 2015 to learn, to take the Human Rights Master Program of this country. And yeah. So
and now maybe you might be teaching a little bit of that. In terms of your lawsuit certainly is, I think, a lesson in human rights. So
thank you, Paul.
So let's we've delved into a lot of parts of this, but let's delve directly into this lawsuit. And as I understand it, you kind of tell people how you brushed up against this problem and forming the Taiwan, My Name, My Right group and the lawsuit that has followed from that.
It was during my stay and study in Norway that I finally aware and realized that I was forced to register as a Chinese citizen. So during my time in Norway, I constantly feel that it's a very bizarre feeling for me to stay in this country, even though I really love this country, to be honest. I love the people here and the nature and the environment. All in all, and how they treat me generally are very well as a foreigner, what I can be honestly say. But still, the registration against my identity play a very big part of me to initiate this movement. Like for example, when I was study in the human rights program, we had party and with my Norwegian classmates and also classmates from other countries, and we played a drinking game, and that we have to take turn to name a capital of one country of the world. And when it was my turn to name a capital, I just instantly shout out Taipei as a capital. But then my Norwegian classmate instantly correct me that actually Taipei is not a capital because they don't think Taiwan is a country. And it was at that time that I was in total shock that, wow, so my country was not really recognized as a true country by the international community. So it is from all this kind of trivial experience that has kind of motivated me that I have to do something to tell the world that actually my Taiwan is in fact a country. It has satisfied all the criteria of a state under the international law. So after I got my resident permits and waiting for the response of my Taiwanese representative in Norway, that they are dealing with this issue. Still, I kind of want to do something from my own side. So I posted a proposal on the Facebook page called Taiwanese in Nordic countries. And then it got a lot of replies that they also face the same issues. And they also want to join me to do something because I was a lawyer at that time. And then I proposed that maybe we can do some legal actions against this decision to seek legal remedy. So after that, we formed a group that discussing how we can initiate this movement. And then after I also discussed with my professor in the human rights program, and also I discussed with Norwegian local lawyers, they all encouraged me that it is something I can do as a lawyer, as a people who knows about law. So we filed our first complaint against the UDI, which means the Norwegian Immigration Authority, in 2016. It's 2017. So that's our first formal movement against the Norwegian government. And afterward, you can see that the official response from the Norwegian authorities are very solid and without any flexibility. That they simply reply that because they don't recognize Taiwan as a state, so there's no way that they can register we Taiwanese as citizens of Taiwan. But even after we raised the examples that actually the U.S. does not recognize Taiwan as a state, and also other European countries and even Nordic countries like Finland, Sweden, according to the experience of my compatriot in those countries, they got the citizenship and nationality of Taiwan. So there must be a more flexible way in registration of your residence nationality. It not always have to stick to the diplomatic or the foreign policies of your country, because it has different purpose. You know, the registration of citizenship of people in your country, actually you have to respect their own will and their what they actually come from, and it also serves the purpose that in many different administrative goals, like for example, we Taiwanese don't need a visa to get into Norway. We can simply use our Taiwanese passport to get into Norway. On the other hand, people from China, the PRC China, they need to apply for visa to get into Norway. So actually, there are huge policy distinction between these two groups of people. So actually, the registration of citizenship should serve for this purpose, not to serve the purpose of your diplomatic policy. That's another issue. As you can see, the U.S. and also other European countries do it in this way. So why can't you just follow how they treat Taiwanese people? And also, Taiwanese people are very satisfied with this registration. So it's a win-win situation. Why not do that? But still, the Norwegian authorities were very stubborn about this issue, and I believe you are later introduced about because of the Nobel Peace Prize instance. They are very afraid to irritate China again. So I think they are very sensitive about something relevant to recognize Taiwan as a country. So they just simply keep refuting our request and say that our claims are clearly unfounded.
And let me just jump in real quick to point out that as we talked about before, there was the Nobel Peace Prize, which seemed to be around the same time, and a lot of people have said that kind of made the Chinese angry. So it's the Norwegian government actually picks the Nobel Peace Prize committee. The committee is then independent, but it is picked by the government. And so when they nominated Liu Xiaobo, China was not happy at all. And that seems to have been what precipitated a pretty big economic fight, like embargoing, no longer accepting any salmon from Norway, and I think Norway was selling 75% of their salmon to China. So there was some real economic battle here. And when we were discussing before, you mentioned that in essence, this battle with Norway, where Norway does the right thing in terms of being pro human rights, and then pays a price for it. No good deed goes unpunished. But that at the end of this, that in essence, China has to be pretty happy with the way its policy played out. And before you go on to kind of the rest of the story, can you speak to that just a little bit?
Yeah. So after about 6 years of froze of the relationship between the two countries, they finally came to a deal, which is called a joint statement of normalization of bilateral relations, which was announced by the two Minister of Foreign Affairs of the two countries. And so whereupon the Norwegian government have to reiterate that its commitment to the One China policy and fully respect China's sovereignty and territorial integrity. And they also have to attach high importance to China's core interest, which is very vague, and major concerns. And they will not support actions that undermine them, and will do its best to avoid any future damage to the bilateral relations. And then after the press conference, the Chinese Minister of Foreign Affairs, Wang Yi, announced in Chinese that the Norwegian side has deeply reflected on the reasons that undermine mutual trust between the two sides. So basically, that means from the Chinese view, the Norwegian government has said sorry to China because their Nobel Peace Prize committee gave the prize to Liu Xiaobo. So I don't know whether the Norwegian audience got that point in that timing, but I think it is a very nice propaganda for the PRC government to their local nationalists that they want to fight in this this diplomatic battle. So basically, like what you said, the Norwegian government has knuckled under because of this incident. So it's very sad to me as a human rights activist and who learned about human rights and also came to Norway because of we know that this is country which are famous for these values, who fought for freedom and also the liberal values like democracy, rule of law, and human rights. But after this joint statement between the two countries, I felt that I really need to do something for my identity and also show, in case the Norwegian government keep banning to China in the future. So I started to raise funding in Taiwan, and also I was invited to the U.S. to give a speaking tour in California to raise funding from my Taiwanese compatriot there. And so it was in 2018 that we have raised about like 335 million new Taiwanese dollars, which is about, let me check.
150,000 US, something like that?
Yes. So it was at that time we have
good
raised.
Chunk of change.
Yeah. So that means we can go for it and recruit our Norwegian lawyer. So after 1 year, we officially filed this lawsuit to the Oslo District Court. And basically to ask the court to confirm that by registering our citizenship as Kina, the Norwegian government has infringed our right to personal identity and thus violated the articles of privacy in ICCPR, ECHR, and the Norwegian Constitution. And then afterwards, our case was dismissed by the district court because of the same reason that was given by the immigration authorities, that because they don't recognize Taiwan as a state, and also because of the UN resolution 2758 that they no longer recognize the Chang's representative as the legal representative of China. So they cannot register as citizen of Taiwan. But ironically and factually, the UN General Assembly Resolution 2758 has no words about Taiwan. It never says that whether Taiwan is a part of China.
Right.
It actually only dealt with the legal and legitimate representative of China at that time. So actually, to base their justification on this resolution is totally foundless, in my point of view. But still, they base their reasons on this resolution, and then we, of course, appeal to the High Court, and basically the second sentence say the same thing as the first sentence, and that they think that to register us as Chinese citizens has nothing to do with our rights and obligations in Norway. But actually, it does, because when we apply for our visa, like I said, when we travel to Norway, we don't have to apply for a visa. We only need to show our passport. So if we are misidentified as Chinese, then that will cause us problem, because the customs might ask us to provide our visa. Then when we have to clarify that actually we are from Taiwan and you have different policy to Taiwanese people. So actually it does affect our rights and obligation in Norway.
It's obvious.
Yes.
That they see you as different, or they wouldn't treat you differently in that way. So it's a double standard on their part.
That's true. And like I said, it's make me more vulnerable to be repatriated to China if I am a Chinese citizen, from the point of view, and that would cause me grave danger if I was repatriated to China. I may face prosecution or detention there. Yes. So there are actually some human rights concerns due to this registration. But still, the High Court and the Supreme Court consecutively has just dismissed our case. And even during the judicial procedure, we have never got the chance to speak for ourselves in the court. It was only written briefs between the two parties. And we are never given we were never given the opportunity for oral hearing directly to the judge and to say that why we want to claim our right to personal identity in this case. So to us as plaintiffs of this case, we think this is very, very unfair trial against us. And so these are also addressed in our application to the European Court of Human Rights. So both the right to personal identity and right to a fair trial was our legal claims in this application to the European Court. So after we exhausted all the domestic remedies last November, we got the six months deadline of the European Court of Human Rights to submit our application there. So during this period, I tried to find some lawyers outside of Norway to kind of think to find someone who could help us think outside of the box, because I think that's basically we have already done everything during the legal procedure in Norway. And then we finally found the English lawyer, Skona Jolie. He is a Queen's Counsel, and very famous in this area of human rights, especially privacy. So we finally decided to recruit her. Oh yeah, by the way, she is also the chair of the Bar Human Rights Committee of England and Wales. So she is very famous in this area, and she is very willing and eager to help us out in this case. And actually, she had brought a lot of creative and new thoughts to this case. So after our application, we feel positive and promising about this case, but still, we are also very nervous that the court might do the same thing as the Norwegian courts that just don't admit that our rights have been violated. So we are kind of looking forward to it, but nervous at the same time.
You mentioned that to me that there are 47 countries that are that basically are bound by the rulings of this European Court on Human Rights, and so it could have a big impact on all these. How many of these countries are there similar problems like Norway in terms of how Taiwanese residents in their country might have to fill out paperwork and identify themselves, and how many are don't have a problem?
You know what, Paul, that actually we have done questionnaires to our followers, Facebook followers, and asked them to provide photos of their resident cards. By then, I mean the Taiwanese residents in other European countries. And then we received about 17 European residents who are citizens of Taiwan. And then we figure out that only Norway and Spain that register Taiwanese as Chinese. So that means other 15 European states register Taiwan or Taiwanese, or they have more flexible way. Like in Luxembourg, they register Taiwanese as Chinese, but with a bracket of Taiwan after Chinese. And then like in Romania, they register us somewhere in Asia.
Well, they're right.
But still creative, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, at least they try to separate that we are different citizens than the Chinese citizens.
Yes.
I mean, this is already what we are acceptable to this decision if we can got from the Norwegian authorities. So you can see it was only Norway and Spain that do this odd thing against Taiwanese people. So and maybe you might know, no European country recognized Taiwan as a sovereign state except Vatican. So actually they have the same one China principle as Norway.
Right.
As Norway have. So I don't know why Norway has to do such a different way to treat Taiwanese people.
Yeah, it does.
Has something to do with the Peace Prize incident.
Yeah, no, it certainly shows that everybody else can do it except for Spain and Norway. So, you also, in an interview, I saw a little video where you were interviewed and talking about this. Someone asked, well, there's the upside that, of course, this could be policy for these 47 countries in Europe. But the downside is maybe you lose the case, as you mentioned, or you're nervous. It could go either way. But you made an argument that it's a victory even if you lose at the ECHR, the European Court of Human Rights. And what you said, I thought really was spot on. It made so much sense, because I work in politics and everyone wants to win always. And usually it's not about as important as stuff as this. It might be about the tax rate or some measure on some local ballot or something, but we always want to win. And we're scared to do something sometimes if we don't think we'll win. And yet some of the biggest things and most important things in the world and in our lives, we don't know whether we're going to win, but we have to do them anyway. Anyway, you had I won't steal all the thunder of what you said, but I really liked your answer to that. So what happens if you lose this case, and is it still a worthwhile case to have brought?
Yes, of course, because I always believe the action itself speaks louder than the result. And I think it is the movement that we initiated that can inspire people, especially my Taiwanese compatriots, to do the same thing for our country. And then, so I think our movement is only a small puzzle of a bigger movement of all Taiwanese people in the bigger picture. So to me, that even if we couldn't nail it in this case, at least we have shown a counterforce against Chinese pressure to the democratic world. And I hope that this could be one example for other Taiwanese and encourages them to challenge the unfair treatment of Taiwan by the international community because of China. And and even in the big picture that Taiwan couldn't become a normal country like others, I still hope that this case could be a part of the history that a small democracy tried to fight against the biggest authoritarian regime at that time. And then sadly that some democratic countries has assisted this authoritarian regime. And then we failed, but nevertheless, we tried our best.
Beautifully said. And, I think people know more about Taiwan today than they did a couple of years ago. And I don't know if I'm just it's my own experience that I'm talking about, or whether that's really the way the world is. But a couple of years ago, I visited. I'd always known about it, but I knew none of the history. I didn't have any real sense of what Taiwan was all about and so on. But since I returned, of course, you've had this pandemic, which I think has not only shown Taiwan to have a government and a society that's cohesive and that's smart and functions, but it also showed China to be a government that hides the truth, that arrests doctors who are trying to speak out and help people all over the world. It was just night and day. And here in the U.S., there were some reports in different publications about, well, China's really handled this so well. And I'm thinking, what are you talking about? They handled it terribly. But I think over the course of it, it's so proved without anybody, browbeating anyone that, hey, isn't Taiwan great and hasn't China done a terrible job? People saw it for themselves. And so I think there has been a little bit more of a sense that, wait a second, oh, now I understand Taiwan's an independent country and there's this fight, China wants to take them over, but that they had something to kind of define Taiwan for them. And I just wonder, because you're traveling around the world. You're in Norway. I'm sure you've been other places in Europe. Do you see that? Do you think people have started to pick up a little bit more, I guess, on both sides of that coin, on the fact that Taiwan, that they understand a little bit more what it is and how well it has developed, and then also that they understand that there's a big problem with China?
Yes, of course. There are some changes happening also in Europe, but I don't think Taiwan got the coverage in Europe like we got in the U.S. Still, because of geopolitics, the European countries does not care so much what is happening in the South China Sea and also Taiwan and also Hong Kong, Xinjiang, Tibet, because when they can earn a lot of profits by not standing for these minority people, then why and if they keep silence, then they can still earn a lot of profits from Chinese markets. So why would they stand for them? And to be honest, those bad behaviors of China, from their point of view, don't have direct consequence to their interest. So from my point of view, I think the change might happen. That's as people started to recognize the values that Taiwan presents. But I think the support for Taiwan would happen only very slowly, and probably only in a very superficial way, as long as the ideas that we have to keep cooperate with the PRC, and then so that we won't face another Cold War. This kind of theory persists in European politicians. I don't think there will be any fundamental change or radical change for Taiwanese people, and especially in European society. From what I experienced, many of my Europeans just view Taiwan as part of the confrontation between the U.S. and China. Yeah, so even human rights learner, for them it is hard for them to understand from the point of view of those people being repressed by China, because I think if I were them, maybe I would have very little sympathy to those people as well, because maybe it is the bad thing our country currently can do. But still, I still think that some idealistic values should be pursued outside of this utilitarian thinking. And I think even in the utilitarian thinking, it is very short-sighted, because absolutely the damage of those universal values would have some negative costs even to Europe in the long run. And then I would say that China would also try to extend their sharp power to other European countries, not only in Norway, but if they keep feeling that there were so less pressure from the democratic group, then they will keep doing it anyway. Yeah.
Right.
So to me, that's even the freedom of speech and self-censored will happen in European society if China has such a strong influence and we keep allowing them to do so.
And again, it's hard to know, whether everybody else feels the same things I feel, but I thought about a year ago, when the NBA, the National Basketball Association, had the problems because somebody spoke out and said we ought to stand with Hong Kong, which I don't know how any freedom-loving person wouldn't stand with Hong Kong. And you saw all kinds of people, the best basketball player in the world, LeBron James, saying, hey, we shouldn't be saying anything about this, and so on. And I think it was a little bit of a wake-up call for people in the U.S. to realize that this sports franchise that we think of as ours is ready to sell out all our values to go make a bunch of money in China. And I have nothing against people making a lot of money. I'd like to make money. I'm glad when somebody else does. But if we don't have a sense that freedom is more important than a buck you can make today, we won't be free for very long. And so I look at it. In visiting Taiwan, I'm a big fan, and I didn't get to visit any beaches. I mean, I was mainly in rooms talking to people. I didn't get to visit beaches. I didn't get to hike any of the mountains or anything. So I'm ready to go back. But I fell in love with the country. But the truth is, supporting Taiwan has nothing that you, as an American, as a European, as anybody anywhere on this planet, it doesn't have to have anything to do with Taiwan, because those values are under attack today. And they're under attack by China. And when we say by China, we don't mean the Chinese people, because the Chinese people, by every indication from Tiananmen Square to protests that have happened even this year, they want the same freedom we all want. Yes. But that regime is super dangerous. And here in the U.S., we're fighting over the origin of the COVID-19. And we've got Facebook shutting down what somebody wants to say. And we've got YouTube shutting down things that don't agree with the World Health Organization. And so I think in the U.S. there is a growing, at least, sense that, wait a second, we've gotten to the wrong place here. And so hopefully there'll be some pushback. But I think it's going to be very important that Europe wake up as well. Because this is a big problem, and Taiwan needs not only the help of the U.S., but I think we could use the help of people all over the world who love freedom.
Yeah. So geographically, Taiwan is in the forefront against the authoritarian regime, but in this modern world, I think the distance of either of all two countries are almost the same in this modern world, because the work can happen in the internet, and then the border would be more and more vague in the future. So any attack against democracy could happen even you live very far away from China. So I mean, the thinking of geopolitics actually should also change in the international order. And then to keep silence or what we said, to keep appeasement to China wouldn't save yourself from this war between democracy and authoritarian regimes.
I think that's very well said, Joseph. I so appreciate you taking the time. I know it's late where you are, and you probably had a long day. Taking the time to talk to people, hats off for the courage to bring this and the good sense to do it in such a way that you're creating a greater movement for freedom. I appreciate it very much. I also am very impressed that I think your English is about as good as mine, and I guarantee you that my Mandarin Chinese is not anywhere close to as good as yours, because I don't know that I choked up here. I don't know that I can say anything, but I'm going to try to say one thing, which I heard the Czechoslovakian senator. It's Czech now, since they split up the Czech Republic and Slovakia, so I got that wrong. But he came to Taiwan and he said, "I am Taiwanese," but he said it in Chinese. He said, 我是 Taiwan Ren. And I know I butchered that some, but I almost got it right. Anyway, I just want to say, so appreciate what you're doing. And frankly, as you pointed out in your closing comments, we're all in this together. It's all about the values of freedom and democracy and people being able to live their lives without some authoritarian telling them they can't. Yeah. And so in that way, I think we're all Taiwanese, and real pleasure to meet you, and thanks for taking the time.
Thank you for inviting me to your podcast and to share my experience to your audience, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. Tim, do you have any comments? You've been surprisingly quiet, but of course, this has been very interesting to listen to. So
I have lots of questions about the legality of your focus on identity.
Yeah.
Because obviously there's a point in European law that Americans probably don't understand. And maybe if you could explain that briefly, maybe that would be worthwhile. Because, I mean, you've talked about your identity as a key focus, but that's a point in law you're going for, right?
Because the case is still ongoing, so I really cannot talk about too much details publicly. But still, I can say that both the EU, at least, share the same one China policy as the US. And then also the NATO share the same policy against China. And also Norway is a part of NATO. So to me, that obviously there should make no difference in treating Taiwanese because both the European country, especially the Western European countries, share the same values as the US. Even though US has more supportive law and bills like Taiwan Relations Act, but still the EU Parliament has made a lot of resolutions to support the positive participation of Taiwan in the international organizations. And in their resolutions, they also call us citizens of Taiwan. So even based on the policy of EU of its own, that I don't think there is some legal basis for Norway to not recognize the citizenship of Taiwan, even though they don't recognize Taiwan as a state, like the US and other European countries does.
Okay, thanks. That makes more sense.
Thank you.
Well, this has been a special podcast for Common Sense. Joseph, thanks again so much. Tim, thank you. And we'll be back this weekend with This Week in Common Sense. But I think folks will enjoy and learn something from this hour we just spent.
Thank you, both Paul and Tim. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. I just wanted to give a very special thank you out to the Taiwan Digital Diplomacy Association for all their excellent assistance in putting this podcast together. The Taiwan Digital Diplomacy Association advocates and facilitates participatory public diplomacy. It's a mouthful. It's a lot of work, but they're good at it. This nonprofit group of young people initiates multinational projects to strengthen Taiwanese partnerships with other countries, especially by creating digital content and hosting real-life events that engage young people and international NGOs located in Taiwan. Thank you very much for all your help. If you want more information about the Taiwan Digital Diplomacy Association, you'll see it up on your screen. It'll also be in the information part underneath the video on YouTube. Also, if you want more information about My Name, My Right, that information is also up on your screen and will be in the information below the video at YouTube. Thank you.